Hi, my name is Andrew Peacock, and this is Meet the Ocean Encounters.
Meet the ocean.
I'd like to tell the story of the Australasian Antarctic expedition of 2013-14. This was a science-based journey to the far southern ocean. I was the expedition doctor on a ship that was chartered by the University of New South Wales. The ship was called the Akademik Shokalskiy. It was a Russian-registered ship. And I was asked to come on board by our expedition leader, Greg Mortimer. He is an Australian polar operator and very accomplished mountaineer. So I knew Greg, he asked me to come along, and we had another expedition leader, Chris Turney, who is a climate change scientist at the university. And we headed 9 days sail south of Australia to an area called Commonwealth Bay. And this is a place that 100 years earlier, Sir Douglas Mawson had taken a team of men to explore that region for the first time. It was the Edwardian equivalent of space travel back in that early days of Antarctic exploration. So we were hoping to repeat some of the science that had been conducted 100 years ago and maybe make some comparison between the findings of the oceanographers and the marine mammal biologists and do some comparison between what was found 100 years earlier. We had a fantastic trip. Lots of science was done. We also managed to get a team of conservationists to the buildings that are still left down there 100 years on from Mawson's expedition, a tragic expedition actually. It's something worth reading about if you have the time to look up about Sir Douglas Mawson's expedition.
To find out more about Douglas Mawson's amazing story, check out Meet the Ocean episode 18, Tim Jarvis Echoes Heroic.
Sir Douglas Mawson was born on May 5th.
Wow, I mean, this is what Mawson must have felt when he reached this.
The huts that have been left are in bad, or have been in bad repair, and so for some time a heritage trust based in Australia has been most summer seasons, sending people down to conserve the huts and work on making them something that people can enjoy into the future when they're able to get to that remote place. Unfortunately, for a few years, this area has been inaccessible. A large iceberg, given an identification number, actually, B09B, had become grounded in the waters just offshore of Commonwealth Bay. And as a result of that grounding, the fast ice, this is the ice that forms fast to the continent each winter and that normally breaks away in the summer, had not been breaking away for the past 3 years because the iceberg had literally changed the ecosystem of that environment. The ice was not moving out each summer. And so access to the small little harbour where Mawson's Huts is located at a place called Cape Denison had been cut off, essentially. Our aim, one of the aims of the expedition, was to get people to the edge of that fast ice, and we took down some vehicles called Argos, which are manoeuvrable and buoyant, small, I can't remember how many wheels they had, but kind of an unusual looking vehicle that can convey people across ice safely. So we took some of those down there. And in fact, we were able to get a small team of people in 2 24-hour shifts across 40 miles of fast ice to Mawson's Huts and do some more of the conservation work down there. So that was the other intention of the voyage, and that was also completed pretty successfully. We did also, however, on our ship have passengers on board who had paid to come along. So it was kind of like a public-private model of exploration in terms of the funding for this expedition. And the passengers, while having enjoyed time on the fast ice, were really keen to also maybe get to land, which we hadn't achieved yet for them as part of the expedition. And so we moved the ship to another area where there was less fast ice, and we made an expedition away from the ship with the science personnel plus the passengers on board. And this is where things went a little bit wrong. On that day, the ship had moved into an open area of ice. The fast ice provided us an option to get to land, it's true, but what we had done was negotiate through some broken up pack ice to reach this area. So we had an open area of water, but to our east, a storm was brewing. And while the passengers and some of the science team and myself were out on the ice, it suddenly became evident that this storm was going to come in quickly and we needed to get off the ice and back on the ship. And that was done, but perhaps with a bit of a delay, such that when the ship started to move and head back out to sea, essentially for our journey home, we'd already been down there for about 2.5 weeks at that stage. The problem was, however, that the wind brought ice towards the ship, and I remember going to bed in my little cabin that night thinking, gee, the ship's moving slowly. This is not normal. There's a lot of ice around, much more than we'd had before. We had a somewhat ice-strengthened ship, but not an icebreaker, nothing that could break through, large amounts of ocean ice that was now moving towards us. And sure enough, when I woke up early in that next morning, there was silence all around. The ship's motors had stopped. I went up to the top deck and looked out, and all I could see was ice rafted up against the ship, and there was no open water for miles to see. We were stuck. And there was a lot of consternation on behalf of the captain, obviously, our expedition leaders, and the passengers, although to some degree, initially this was just an exciting event that nobody knew how it was all going to play out, but that it was something different. It was something perhaps exciting, except that what we didn't all realise was that we were actually going to be stuck on the ice or in the ice on the ship for the next 2.5 weeks, because the weather did not change. There was no new wind coming from another direction to blow that ice away, as one might expect or hope to occur. It's not unusual for ships to get stuck in the ice in Antarctica, even in this modern era. Sometimes conditions change, and ships supplying, let's say, Australian bases down there moderately often do get stuck in the ice for short periods. Anyway, our captain was pretty concerned, and we had some large icebergs not far from the ship. Those icebergs move independently of the ice that's packed around us, because there's so much of an iceberg that's actually underwater that they can be influenced by water current as compared to, say, the wind that mostly blows the superficial ice around. The captain was concerned enough that one of those icebergs could come close to the ship and impact the ship. If that occurred, that would be an emergency situation. Everyone on board would need to get off the ship onto the ice. And so he asked for help. He used maritime distress signal called a pan-pan, and that set into motion a sequence of events involving rescue authorities in the UK initially, and then Australia. And there we were, stuck in the ice in the far southern ocean. It was Christmas time. We had a very worried captain and some concerned passengers and expedition leaders who weren't really quite sure what would happen next. We had fun over Christmas. We broke out the champagne and enjoyed a feast while we tried to ignore the reality of our new surroundings, despite the fact of how beautiful they actually were. So it was an interesting little period of time for sure. I was also photographing while I was down there, and our expedition leader, Chris Turney, was using a satellite modem to send blog posts out to the world using his platform on the internet. And we became the source of some attention from the world's media. It's a pretty quiet time between Christmas and New Year, if you've never noticed, in the world's media. So any little thing can spike some attention, and our little predicament down there did. So we became the focus of people contacting us by email, asking for interviews, and it was all a little bit crazy, to tell you the truth, but fun at the same time. And we had a French icebreaker not far away, but they were unable to get into the ice because their capability just wasn't quite strong enough. Then we had a Chinese ship called the Snow Dragon, or the Zhulong, and they did attempt to come in close to us in the ice, but their icebreaker also ended up getting stuck. The ice was too thick, they couldn't go backwards or forwards, and now we had two ships stuck in the far southern ocean in the ice. So, things were getting a little bit concerning and almost comical from that perspective. We really thought that the Chinese icebreaker would just come and cut a path to us and we would get out. That didn't happen, and so a request was made of the Australian ship Aurora Australis to steam 4 days sail away from where they had been refuelling one of the Australian Antarctic Division bases. That was a big deal for them to interrupt a difficult working job in difficult conditions, always down in Antarctica. But they did. They came close to the ice. They couldn't quite get all of the way in either. And eventually a plan was hatched that the Chinese ship would use their a large twin-rotor helicopter to fly from their location across to the ice next to our ship and take our science staff, expedition staff and passengers over to the ice next to the Aurora Australis, and the Aurora Australis would then take us out of the situation. Our Russian captain was pretty confident, I guess, that the wind would eventually change and move the ice away. So the captain and the crew, the Russian crew, in fact, decided to stay on board the Shokalskiy. I thought that was pretty interesting. I really wasn't quite sure where their confidence was coming from, as we'd seen very little change up until that stage. And, there was some talk of our ship being in the ice through the rest of the summer and into the winter. And obviously that was not going to be something sustainable for anyone to be on board in terms of the amount of supplies we had. But don't worry, there was plenty of vodka on board. On a Russian ship, you'd never go dry vodka, and there were plenty of chocolate croissants still coming out of the galley. So let's not get too concerned about how we were all doing at that time. Anyway, so a pretty daring operation was conducted. We had a number of helicopter flights from the Chinese ship. Everyone was very excited when they saw this enormous snow dragon helicopter in the air, and landing successfully next to us, and progressively shuttled all of the team away from the Akademik Shokalskiy and over to the Aurora Australis. We boarded that ship, and the interesting thing then, of course, was that it took some time for the Aurora to get out of the bit of ice that it was in, and then it needed to sail 4 days back to the west across to the station, Casey Station, that they were refueling, which was an operation that subsequently was delayed. We spent 4 days doing figure of eights out at sea because of a big storm. And so you can imagine by this time we'd been significantly delayed in our return home, as had the people on board the Aurora. They had their schedule completely upset as well. So while they were very generous in having us on board, there was some little issues, I guess, in the sense that some of the team there were, pretty unhappy to have this new paradigm thrust upon them by a group of people that, unfortunately got stuck south. Eventually, the refueling operation did occur, and just as we were about to call an end to operations and the captain of the Aurora Australis was given the okay to head back north, we learned that the wind indeed had changed back at the area where the Shokalskiy was, and that the Russian ship, our little Russian ship that had carried us all the way down south, was now on its way north, back to Bluff in New Zealand, which was our original destination. And so it was a little bit ironic that we had been moved from ship to ship, and then the icebergs that had been worried about did not at all impact the ship. That was, as I mentioned, the original concern, but they eventually did move away. So luckily the ship was safe, the Russian captain was safe and his crew, and they had hopefully, fairly enjoyable sail back north without any guests or passengers to worry about. And meanwhile, we started sailing north and we ended up at Hobart in Australia. Beautiful Hobart, a very, very beautiful place, well worth visiting if you ever get the chance. But the Shokalskiy was back in Bluff at least a week before we got to Hobart in Tasmania, where we were greeted by a media scrum who were interested to hear the stories of the Australian expeditioners and climate science team that were stuck in the ice down south.
Meet the ocean.
Meet the Ocean is produced by Paul North and Andrew Giddings, with sound designed by Kelsey Anderson and original music by Vin Gast, with special thanks to adventure travel photographer and expedition doctor Andrew Peacock for his incredible story. Meet the Ocean is a listener-supported nonprofit. Visit our website to find more podcasts, underwater videos, and other fun educational material. Also, you can support Meet the Ocean by joining its online Patreon community. For as little as $1 a month, you will gain access to rewards and exclusive behind-the-scenes content. To find out more, visit patreon.com/meettheocean. Don't forget to subscribe to never miss an episode, and please rate and review our podcast on iTunes or on whatever platform you choose to listen. Until next time, may the salt water be with you.